goal today is sort of to connect you with the agencies and resources and information that you'll need to take your work in agriculture in your community to the next level. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, thanks for your patience. So here we are, agriculture and clean water. And before we dive in, I do want to acknowledge that this project has been funded by the Lake Champlain Basin Program and the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. And they have supported both my work in preparing this presentation for you all today, as well as 6 one-on-one individualized brainstorming sessions with conservation commissions and conservation-focused nonprofits within our district. So we're really excited this year to focus on capacity building across partners so that we will have more people that are in a position to identify potential clean water projects and know how to connect with partners or take steps that need to happen to implement them. So we're really grateful for their support. On that note, if you are here watching this live or if you are watching this sometime in the future, at the end of this presentation, it would be really helpful for you to click on this link, which I think also Matt is going to throw in the chat at the end, and just fill out a quick 5-minute survey so that I know where you're coming from listening to this presentation today, and what type of organization you represent, and then a couple things about what you may have learned. That will really help me with my reporting so that we can continue to host presentations like this into the future. So the Winooski Conservation District is one of 14 conservation districts across Vermont, and all conservation districts have similar shared goals of protecting water quality, improving soil health, and improving wildlife habitat. But each one offers slightly different programs. Most of our funding comes from grants that we write. So depending on where you're coming from within the state, I really encourage you to get in touch with your conservation district to learn about the specific program offerings that they have. Speaking for myself, the Winooski Conservation District serves Chittenden and Washington counties, as well as 3 towns in Orange County in the headwaters of the Winooski watershed. And our goal is to promote the wise use, sustainable development, and conservation of our district's natural resources. We connect residents and communities with the necessary education and technical assistance to implement on-the-ground projects for water quality, soil health, and wildlife habitat. And this year we are celebrating our 80th year of being around as an organization. So like I said, our goals for today are to sort of have a pretty broad look at where are some sources of pollution on agricultural land. What are some associated clean water solutions? And then I want you to leave having gained some confidence about sharing this information with your farmer neighbors, and also gain an understanding, or at least a starting point for understanding some Vermont specific regulations. So I wanted to start out with a quick poll, not a quiz of any type, but just a guess. So if you would type in the chat, your guess of the total % of phosphorus that enters Lake Champlain in a year, how much do you think comes from agricultural land? I'll give you a couple moments to just type in a guess. Don't worry if it's not perfect. And then I'll have, I think Matt can read out a few of them.
%. 60. 65, 5, 15, 50. Really all over the place. 30.
A large spread. Okay, great. Well, I will reveal the answer on the next slide. So on this slide, this is a figure from the Lake Champlain Basin Program State of the Lake Report. And this shows that about 38% of the load into Lake Champlain comes from agricultural lands. A lot of times I find that people shoot a little bit higher than that. And so I think it's interesting. But agriculture is certainly the largest land use that is contributing to phosphorus in Lake Champlain, which presents a large opportunity, I think, for change. But something that I do like to note on this slide as well is that on the little chart on the right, you can see that per square mile, developed lands contribute almost double the amount of phosphorus compared to agricultural lands. So I think there's a lot to be said for protecting agricultural land and just changing some practices that are happening on that land, because it still is providing an important conservation service, as well as providing local food, which is something that a lot of Vermonters truly value. So I think I have the opportunity to work with people in cities because our district covers Burlington and Montpelier, and also lots of people in more rural areas like Cabot and Waitsfield. And a lot of times people point fingers, right? People are saying, oh, well, it's all the wastewater treatment facilities, it's all the farmers. And really what this graph reminds me every time is that it's about everyone, and everyone has small changes and big changes that can be made to help improve water quality. Interestingly, the state auditor also released a report in 2019 sharing that improving water quality in the agricultural sector would be the most cost-effective strategy for decreasing phosphorus loading into Lake Champlain. So I think there is a great argument for more groups getting into agricultural outreach and into this field. And I was curious if folks who are here can write in the chat if and or what types of work your commission or your organization has already done in the field of agriculture. I'll give you just a couple minutes to write a very brief summary. And if you haven't, then you can also just type, no experience in the chat. That would be good to know as well. Do we have some thoughts?
Yeah, so Darren said that there were local tax stabilization contracts. Emily said that her town has had no efforts so far. Emily Alger said that conservation easements and support for best management practices around water quality for farmers was one effort in her town. Anybody else? Heidi,
we could roll. Oh, go ahead.
Heidi said that the Salisbury Conservation Commission is working with the Addison County River Watch regularly, which also works with towns, landowners, and farmers sharing information.
Great. Well, that's so there's a pretty widespread. Some people have been involved more directly maybe with agriculture and conservation, some more through taxes, some with no experience, some through water quality sampling. So when I was thinking through this presentation, I was really reflecting on what could be the role of a conservation commission. I know that commissions are all sorts of different sizes and have different focuses and different strengths depending on their members at any given time. And what I really wanted to emphasize is that you don't need to become a technical expert to have a positive influence on water quality and agriculture in your community. Conservation commissions are really the eyes and ears on the ground. You know your community best. And so I think that the things that a conservation could best do to advocate for clean water would be to connect, spread the word, and celebrate. So helping to connect individual farmers in your community with conservation districts or other agencies that provide funding and technical assistance for clean water projects could be a great first step. A lot of these organizations, including conservation districts, are either serving large regions or serving statewide. And so it's impossible for us to know every single farmer, especially the smaller scale ones that might benefit from some outreach. So that would be a huge game changer if you are able to share a little bit about our programs and opportunities that exist for farmers. The second would be to spread the word about specific program offerings that are relevant to your community. So at the end of this presentation, I've attached a long list of potential mailing lists and websites that you could visit. And those agencies are always sharing information about events and programs. And so what I could see a role being for a commission member would be to actually curate all of those events and information and presentations that are happening and just pick out the ones that really feel relevant to your town or to your community. And then the last piece would be to celebrate farmers that are making strides to be more lake friendly. I think there's sometimes so much emphasis on, finding farms with problems, quote unquote, or, opportunities is more the word that we like to use. But we also need to celebrate people that are making pretty big changes to their day-to-day farming routines in order to be more lake friendly. And we'll talk about what that looks like and why it can be such a big challenge. But I could see a role being celebrating, whether that's publishing a press release, if that's something that would make that person feel celebrated, or just thanking them when you see them out and about in town, or maybe getting connected with the Signs of Conservation program, which was developed by the Franklin County Conservation District, where when farmers implement certain practices, they can actually receive, in some cases, purchase these signs to advertise the fact that they are doing something, as it says, for my land, but for our water. This is a really great program that I definitely would encourage you to check out if you know some farmers that could use a little bit of recognition and celebration for their efforts. So a baseline for this conversation is that across the state, required agricultural practices exist to help. There are standards to help improve water quality in Vermont, and there are laws that cover everything from where a farm can stack their manure to establishing buffers along streams and requiring soil testing at regular intervals. The required agricultural practices also establish an inspection schedule depending on the size of the farm. So smaller farms are visited once every 7 years by an inspector, where the largest farms are visited once every 2 years, so that inspectors can make sure that the regulations are being followed and also help connect farms with resources if they need to move a certain project forward to be in compliance. I think that what you need to know about the RAPs is that while there are some rules that only apply to the large farms, most of these rules apply to farms of all sizes and types, including livestock, veggie, equine, hemp. And even a farm with just 4 horses or 5 cows is still required to follow the regulations and to consider where they're putting their manure, to take regular soil samples, to keep good records of when they're spreading manure or compost and when they're harvesting. So it could be useful for you to visit one of these 2 links to familiarize yourself a little bit with the RAPs. And then again, as you're talking with people and farmers in your community, ask, hey, do you know how the RAPs apply to your farm? And if they have some questions, you could refer them to these links or to a district or to the Agency of Agriculture. But the intention of this regulation is to improve water quality across the state. And it would be certainly very useful to get some of those smaller farms on board that don't realize that these laws actually do apply to their operations as well. So this first link, the RAP quiz, was developed by the Orleans County Conservation District, and it is a 1 to 2 hour sort of interactive video and quiz style training. And I definitely recommend that one. It's great for visual learners. And the second link is about a 6-page sort of visual document, again, describing the different parameters outlined in these laws. Oh, I meant to note on this slide as well that it is also within your power to report water quality concerns directly to the Agency of Agriculture. And they could send an inspector to check out a water quality concern at a farm in your community. But I really think that referring a farm to a non-regulatory agency like a district or like UVM Extension helps to build trust and community to do that first rather than choosing to report something that you're concerned about. But it is within your power. So in this next section, we'll talk through some project examples of clean water issues and their associated solutions. And most of these are pulled directly from Conservation in Vermont, which is a guide published by the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, also linked here. And I definitely recommend you check it out for more details on each practice. A lot of what we'll be talking about is phosphorus reduction. And I always like to have a quick note about phosphorus. Though we often talk about it as a pollutant, it is a naturally occurring element that is a critical nutrient for plant growth. So it's really all about striking the right balance. Phosphorus is a pollutant in Vermont surface waters right now because there's so much that it's creating an imbalance. But it is good, and we do need to have some of it around. Phosphorus is a very sticky element, so it will often adhere to soil particles. And this is important because so much of what we will be talking about with these practices is preventing erosion. So we're not just worried about soil going into surface waters and making them cloudier, although that is one issue to increase turbidity. But for the most part, we want to prevent erosion because we want to keep that phosphorus, that nutrient, on the farm so that it can grow plants and do what it's supposed to do, as opposed to allowing that phosphorus to tumble by way of sticking to one of those soil particles into surface waters and continue sort of tipping the scales towards having too much phosphorus. So we'll talk a lot about preventing erosion. I always like to mention this one about phosphorus though. So the format of the next few slides is that we'll go through these 5 concerns and 5 solutions. You can take a quick look over them. And if you see a gray text box with a star on top, that's an action item that I think might make sense for a Conservation Commission to take relating to these practices. So the first one is everyone's favorite, cows in the stream. So of course, having cows in the stream creates a few potential concerns. One is that the weight of the cows moving through the stream and the disturbance of their hooves will actually destabilize the stream banks. So we might see a lot more stream bank erosion directly into the surface water. And of course, any manure that they deposit, especially directly into the water, could cause bacteria issues further downstream. And the solution to this is not always as easy as it seems. Of course, fencing the cows out of the surface water is beneficial. But in order to do that, you'll also need to help create a new pathway so that the cows can still get from point A to point B if there's a pasture across the river. And oftentimes the farm will also need to create a new water source if that stream was a primary source of water for the animals to stay happy and healthy out in the fields. So there are a few cases where animals are allowed to access streams, especially just for a brief crossing. But for the most part, farms are required to fence animals out of surface water and kind of make those alternate pathways and build new water sources. So since this can sort of create a domino effect of projects, again, this would be a great opportunity to see an issue on a farm in your community, refer them to a conservation district or UVM extension, and mention that we will be able to connect them with both the technical resources to get that project done and also the financial resources to be able to pay for, if not all of it, most of the work that would need to be done in that case. These are a few more pictures of what that might look like. So there's another fence along the stream here on the left. In the top right is one of the watering troughs that would need to be set up in order to give the animals access to fresh water. And the bottom right is showing sort of a stabilized river crossing. So there's been some engineering work here done, and This is going to allow the cows to still get to the pasture on the other side of the river without causing lots of damage in the stream bank itself. So our second category is field erosion. Maybe you've driven by some fields in your community in the spring and seen them look like this, just bare soil, soggy, small lakes forming in the low spots of the field. Fields that are left bare after annual crops like corn are harvested are very prone to losing lots of valuable topsoil and lots of phosphorus-laden topsoil whenever it rains. So there are a couple solutions to this. One of them is planting a cover crop. The roots and the leaves of a cover crop like winter rye, for example, will help to both hold the soil in place and also provide some cover with the greenery on top. And in certain cases, the green plant material can be mulched back into the soil to provide additional nutrients for the next season. So that could be one great way to use cover crops. A different solution, or one that could be used in conjunction, would be crop rotation planning. So this could be relevant for a farm that's growing corn and hay, that maybe they'll grow corn for 3 years and then grow hay for 5, so that over the average of those 8 years, the soil loss from that field is significantly decreased. This can also be relevant for vegetable farmers who are rotating between different types of annual and perennial crops in different fields. Again, to work on the nutrient balance, but also to try to cover up the field for as much time as possible to decrease the soil loss. Now, cover cropping can require new tools and also a new mindset. It adds a whole different plant into a cropping system that needs to be dealt with in the spring so that it doesn't get out of control and outcompete the plant that the farmer is actually trying to grow to be able to sell or feed to their animals. So switching the field from a conventional annual cropping system to one that is no-till and cover crop can take a lot of time, a lot of resources, but a great place to start for inspiration and some technical information is UVM Extension's annual no-till and cover crop symposium, where they're educating farmers about cover cropping systems, and a lot of folks who have already adopted this system will be there and can sort of speak to the nuances of how it plays out on their farm. So this could be a great opportunity to sort of get someone's foot in the door by getting them to this conference. Oftentimes, farmers can also be compensated for growing a cover crop with federal funding from NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. So this could also be an opportunity to connect them with NRCS and let them know that there would be plenty of funding available to help them make the switch. Here are a few different pictures of what cover crops might look like in action. The one on the left is in the fall. So a crop has been seeded down and it's just starting to emerge. On the top right, there's a lush cover crop growing in between the corn rows. So throughout the corn growing season, there's still that nice sort of field-wide cover. And on the bottom right is actually one of my favorites because you don't always think about cover crops in orchards. But in this orchard, you can see those large patches of maintained grass, which is going to hold the soil in on that slightly sloping bank. So if you're seeing cover crops grown in your community, again, this could be a great opportunity to just, if you know the farmer, say, hey, thank you. Do you think you might want a sign so people know what you're up to? Because it takes a lot of effort to refine a cover cropping system that works for your farm. So if you're seeing these lovely results and you're seeing bare soil that's covered up with green every spring, a lot of work and a lot of thought has gone into that. So the next potential source of pollution is in nutrient management. So overspreading manure or other amendments like compost or chicken manure onto fields that don't really need it, onto fields that maybe already are very high in phosphorus or other nutrients. And the best way to prevent that is by creating a nutrient management plan, regularly testing soil, and regularly testing manure. I'll get into all of those in more detail in the coming slides. So again, this is an area where conservation districts can help farmers write their own nutrient management plans, often at no cost. So if you're talking with a farmer who maybe is expressing that they're having a hard time spreading their manure, having a hard time getting rid of it all every year, or just not sure if their manure is going to the fields where the crops could really use it the most, this could be a great opportunity for them to learn more about their property, to learn more about their soils. So the foundation of a nutrient management plan is soil and manure sampling. The RAPs require that most farms sample every field once every 3 years to really learn about the soil chemistry and what the needs are for that field for growing specific types of crops. They also require that most farms test their manure sources once a year. So for a dairy farm, they're testing their own manure that then they're spreading out onto the fields. For other farms that maybe are importing nutrients like compost or chicken manure, making sure that they know what the chemical composition of that manure is. And analysis is available from the UVM Soils Lab for people that are wanting to do this themselves. You can also hire out people to do it. Sometimes districts can help with sampling depending on the circumstances as well. But it's a really important foundation for understanding the soils on a farm. And then once you have that information about the soil samples and the manure samples and also a suite of different maps, then you can go ahead and actually write this huge document called the Nutrient Management Plan. And it involves field by field soil sample results, maps, the soil types of each field, the slope. All of this information is then plugged into a computer model that will calculate a Russell II value to determine the risk of erosion or the risk of phosphorus loss. And based on that, it will create a plan that then farmers have a say in as well for where they want to spread their manure or amendments, so that those manure or amendments will go to the fields where it will both benefit the crops the most and to ensure that amendments won't be spread on fields that already are very high in nutrients. So this is a really great strategy for farmers to both just know more about the soils on their farm and also spread their amendments a bit more intentionally rather than in some cases, spreading on the field when there's time or when it's dry enough to get on there with equipment or because it's close to the farm. Everyone has their own sort of intuitive way of amending their soils. This way is a little bit more precise and can help ensure that overspreading isn't happening. So having a nutrient management plan is required for certified small farm operations and larger. And you can go onto some of the links for the RAPs to learn about farm sizing, but that's about 50 cows or 40 horses. So a sort of smallish medium operation would be required to have this nutrient management plan. But the process simply of soil sampling and manure sampling and using those results to inform where nutrients are being applied is very useful for all farm sizes. So I would definitely encourage you to share and sort of ask people if they have a nutrient management plan or if they might be interested in learning more. So the next category is stream bank erosion. And this is a concern that we see when there is an unprotected stream bank that is crumbling into a waterway, oftentimes because there used to be a lot of trees along that bank and they were cleared to make a pasture or to make a field. And the solution to this might be pretty obvious. Put the trees back, sort of. So you could establish a perennial buffer zone of grass. So you can see in the picture on sort of the left of the solutions side that there's an annual crop, perhaps corn being grown in rows. And then before it gets to the stream area on the right, there's a pretty large section of just grasses that will be there year after year, almost to provide a speed bump to the water and to the particles of soil to slow them down and to drop them into that area before they make it to the surface water. The second option that is a little bit more intensive, but certainly very impactful, is planting a full-on perennial buffer zone with shrubs and trees. And you can see from this aerial image, you can pick out where the stream is just from the little treetops. And that's a very effective strategy for protecting water quality on a farm. For the most part, tree planting projects on farms are fully supported. The conservation districts run a Trees for Streams program where we would pay for the tree materials and the technical assistance to decide the species, as well as recruit volunteers or crew to come plant the trees. There's also a program called CREP. I think it's the Conservation Reserve, I forget what the E stands for, program. Sorry about that. That is run by the Agency of Agriculture. Nope. Sorry, the acronym threw me off. That is run by the Farm Service Agency. My apologies. And CREP can often actually reimburse farmers for the amount of land that they might lose by choosing to plant trees in what was once part of their field. So there are great options for stream bank erosion to be reestablishing sort of that perennial and treed area. And the last category is ditches and gullies. So this concern can be hard to see at certain times of the year or from certain angles or perspectives in a field. But when we start to see early signs of erosion in a field, it is kind of an early warning sign of something that can lead to a much larger problem in just a few years. So dealing with ditches and gullies, you can sort of see this low point in the picture where just a little bit of water is starting to trickle down and maybe flow to a outlet sort of area, but it doesn't look like this all year round, maybe just in the spring. There's an opportunity to put a quick Band-Aid on that that could really help to stabilize that area in the field and prevent that ditch or gully from becoming a much deeper ditch, gully area of surface water flow in that field and sort of prevent the issue before it arises. And one of the best ways to do that is with grassed waterways, or just, again, throwing down some perennial seeding. So throwing down some grasses in between the rows of corn or other vegetables, hemp, whatever you want, so that those roots and the vegetation above can hold on to the soil particles in that area that's starting to destabilize. And this is another practice that NRCS can often provide financial and technical support to help farmers implement. I think this series of 3 pictures is just amazing. So here's the grass waterway on top that you saw in the previous slide. Then in the middle, you can see the grass being seeded down in its first season. And then on the bottom, you can just see this lush grassed area with in the background, just a couple little rows of corn sort of going out either way. And this can be a really successful strategy. So as I've been mentioning all along, solutions to some of these problems can be expensive, and many of them require technical assistance or sometimes even a professional engineer. And so plenty of support is available from the federal level, like NRCS and the Farm Service Agency, from the state level, like the Vermont Agency of Agriculture and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, and other groups like NOFA Vermont for organic farmers. And most of these expenses are able to be covered for the most part. Some funders will require some match from the farmer for certain projects, but there are lots of ways to sort of match and juggle funding to really be able to give farmers more options to, in many cases, do projects that they already want to do. You know, the economics of farming is very difficult, and COVID certainly hasn't helped, although in some ways there has been a renewed interest in local food systems. It's still been very difficult for farmers to find access to the markets they need, to be paid well enough for the products that they are producing. So it's really difficult to make a living farming. I'm sure most of you know that. So we want to put farmers in a position where they have choices and they're not choosing to refuse a project that would benefit water quality because of money. So there are lots of groups out there offering money and offering technical assistance to be able to sort of increase choices that are available to people managing very large swaths of land in our communities. So I've mentioned both of these groups a lot, but I think that two of the groups that are best situated to help people navigate the implementation process are conservation districts and UVM Extension. You would certainly be welcome to reach out directly to any of the other groups that have been mentioned, but oftentimes we're able to pair together the federal funding, the state assistance, the nonprofit, little pings that go off in our brain of how we can create a web of support and connection to help move these projects forward. So you are certainly welcome to reach out to us, or certainly welcome to reach out to a specific agency and get them in touch with the farmer if that makes more sense for the project that you're seeing. And I wanted to, I'm wrapping up here, but I wanted to consider some shared values and how we might use those when talking with our farmer neighbors about water quality. In some ways, this area has become somewhat contentious, I think, because farmers feel that the finger is really being pointed at them as the only source of imbalance in the phosphorus issue in Lake Champlain, and also just erosion and runoff and nutrient runoff in general throughout the state. So I like to come at these conversations with keeping our commonly shared values in mind. Certainly, I don't think there's such thing as a universal value, but I was curious if you would be willing to put in the chat just one value that you think is widely shared across many Vermonters. I'll start with an example, and that example is clean water. Everyone wants to have clean water to drink. Everyone wants to have clean water to swim in and play in. Are there other values that you would be willing to share? You can just read them out as they come.
No farms, no food.
Great, that's my next one. Local food and local economies. What else? I'll throw another one in there while you all are thinking. I think that many Vermonters really value hard work and creative solutions.
We also have caring for our neighbors and communities.
Wow, this is as if it's scripted. Being a good neighbor. Maybe one more from the chat.
Jane also said that farms keep land from being developed. Avery said resilience.
Great. I love both of those.
Strong agricultural community.
Awesome. A couple that I would throw in there to add would be maybe a sense of shared responsibility to care for the land. And then, yes, connected to farms, meaning that there's less development, also that soil is more valuable in a field than in a stream. This is something that farmers know. Soil is one of their most valuable assets. So when it comes down to it, if clean water and being a good neighbor and shared responsibility to care for the land aren't quite hitting the mark, there's always the fact that the soil is better in the field than it is in the stream. So these are just some things to consider as you're framing and thinking about these ideas. So I will make the slides for this PowerPoint available because there are tons of links available for you to explore further. But this is a list of, and certainly not comprehensive, but a starting place for you if you wanted to sign up for some monthly newsletters, if you wanted to explore some of the websites for groups that are providing support, and also stay in the loop about resources and conference dates. I would encourage you to check out all of these. And like I said, you could act as sort of a local information curator for your community to really get the word out about things that are relevant for the types of farms in your area, maybe regional conferences, programs that are providing financial support to farmers in the time of COVID. And you might be able to just help get that information out in your community because there is so much of it. And if you're trying to run a farm, it can also be difficult to sort of wade through all of the different offers and programs that are happening. So for the most part, that is my presentation. This is my contact information, and you're certainly welcome to reach out to me. Like I said, you'll want to check out your local conservation district, but if you have thoughts or questions, I'm happy to answer them and refer you to the right person. We are here because we love the land that we live on. This is an amazing graphic that a UVM student actually made for us to share, and I love to share it because that is really what it comes down to, I think, for all of us here. And I will put in another quick plug that if you'd like to support future presentations like this, please click on this survey and let me know what you thought and where you're coming from today. So thanks so much for your time. And I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions. So I will pop back onto the screen.
Yeah, I'll put the survey link in the chat at the end of the talk today. Does anybody else have any questions that you'd like to ask Kristen?
Okay, I can see a question from Darren that says—
Matt, you're on mute.
Oh, I took a look at the chat, so I can see this question that says, what's the best way to approach a farmer that you may not know about these issues? That's a great question. Sometimes I will find out information about a farm that might benefit from a program and just give them a call on the phone. I like to lead with the fact that I'm a non-regulatory agency and that I might be able to offer technical and financial support. And sometimes that will be a good way to get the foot in the door. I think that conservation commissions and town people working for municipalities sort of hopefully have built more of those community connections. So if you don't know that person, maybe you know someone who does, and sort of might be able to use those sort of local webs of connection to do that. I think not approaching someone with the, hey, I noticed that there's a huge water quality problem on your farm, but maybe sending a letter or a note or an email saying like, hey, there's this great presentation coming up, thought you might be interested, and sort of slowly building that relationship over maybe 3 or 4 different small pieces of outreach. That could be good. If your commission hasn't done agricultural work yet, also, maybe it would make sense to just start as being a hub of information. So having a few links on your commission's page will help to demonstrate that you're sort of plugged in and connected to the resources in the agricultural community. Or, you know, choosing to attend some more of these webinars and just increasing your knowledge at large. Maybe I'm rambling. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. Any other thoughts? I would also love to hear, you know, if people feel that they can take any action on what I shared, like if you feel that any of this might be a good fit for your commission or for your community, I would love to hear that as well.
Hi, Kristen, it's Jens. Do you have good examples of commissions that have really taken a celebratory approach to local ag and really offered that celebratory piece first before any of the discussions about water quality and improving water quality? Can you give us examples of maybe projects that you've known in that arena?
That's a great question. In my experience with the district, I haven't yet partnered with a commission or heard an example of one that has taken that approach, but I could see it potentially being very successful to sort of go from the community building aspect first. And again, like I said, whether that's promoting the signs or having a big thank you post-COVID when there's like a big town event, you know, thanks to the farmers that are implementing these practices, or a press release. I mean, whatever it is that you think will actually make the farmers feel appreciated, not to put them in the spotlight if they're not interested. But I think, yeah, sort of building those connections first and then taking the perspective of, so what can we do now to make our community even more water quality friendly? Like, we've already seen a lot of effort. What are some more steps that could be taken? It sounds like a winning strategy to me. I don't have a case study to share with you about it.
Do we have any other questions?